Hi, Andrew from SACS, and welcome to video number 1 of our 10-video series on the question of psychometric assessment as it relates to mental health. In this series, we'll be talking to you about a range of new perspectives on mental health, and some of those perspectives are pretty significant variations from what we've had in the past, and in particular, they are going to affect our way of looking at mental illness, but also our way of responding to mental illness. It's exciting times in this space. So the topics that we'll be covering, you see there are 10 topics, 10 short videos on each of these topics. So we start out with some stuff about mental health, its trends, its history, and the DSM method of diagnosing mental illness. Then we'll talk about therapy and whether it works or not. And we'll talk about a range of issues associated with where mental health comes from, such as genes and environment and so forth. But this video is specifically addressing the question of trends in mental health. So let's start out with some recent findings. Now, this diagram is an infographic which shows you generational decline in perception of mental health. And you'll see that for people who are elderly, like for instance this cohort of 60 to 74, there's little change in the perception of mental health. But what you see is a collapse here, particularly in the mental health of young people, the perceived mental health of young people. One of the things that will be key to all of this is a thing called resilience, and that absolutely has been in decline in recent times. So longitudinal databases show that people are less resilient these days, and a range of theories have been advanced. One of them is cosseting, including the absence of risky play. So kids previously were encouraged to undertake risky things. Now, risky things, doing risky things and finding that you come out the other end still intact is a way of building resilience. Certainly one of the things that we know is that you don't make people more resilient by protecting them. What you do to make people more resilient is you prove to them that they can cope with what's going on in their lives. Another driver might be priming. You must be mentally unwell. Yet it's kind of cool these days to say, yeah, I'm struggling, I'm mentally unwell. And in fact, if you do that, you do run the risk of priming people to see themselves in that way. Priming is a very dominant psychological characteristic. If I say to you, gee, you're looking well today, you know what? You're going to feel well. If I say to you, you must be unwell, or you must be struggling, or this is stressful, then of course you're primed to be more stressed. Now, that's a really interesting trend. You do need to be open enough so that people can tell you how they're feeling. But on the other hand, there's a fine line between kind of encouraging them to see themselves as mentally unwell. And we do know that people get psychologically more healthy when they're primed with a thing called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is, yeah, we can cope with this, can't we? You know, we're going to be able to get by. That will cause people to be psychologically more well. And the final component, which could be related to mental health and its decline, is screens. Now, this is a somewhat contentious issue, but some people believe that screens are making people's mental health worse. Some believe that it's having no effect at all, but there are plenty of researchers who do say it's having an effect. So we must at least take that possibility into account, because certainly one difference between the current generation of under 25-year-olds versus previous generation, well, one of them is screens, of course. But also we need to look at the history of mental illness, because this leads up to a range of different things that we'll deal with in the succeeding videos. And explanations of mental illness, well, one of the first explanations was that it was supernatural. So, you know, if you read the tale of Genji, for instance, anytime anybody gets sick, it's because they've got evil spirits in them. And that was a very dominant perspective on mental health for a very long time. The second reason is somatogenic, which is to say that there are biological reasons for our mental illness. And going back to 400 BC, Hippocrates believed that certain combinations of chemicals or fluids in your blood would make you mentally unwell or mentally well. And so this is a somatogenic response. And you see that that gave rise to therapies like, for instance, shock therapy and things like psychotropic medications. But that's a biological perspective, if you want to see it that way. Finally, there's the psychogenic perspective. So the psychogenic perspective is that we have psychological reasons for being as we are. You know, a classic example would be trauma. We experience traumatic things, and that causes us to be more mentally unwell. The next video will be about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And DSM is the #1 method that people use to diagnose mental illnesses, and it has its strengths and it has its limitations. Join us for the next video to see what they are.